Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for being. Look at all of you. Wow, there's a lot of you, and now I'm feeling totally intimidated.
No, you're not.
I haven't had as much wine as she has. Anyway, so thank you for being here. This is the final day of Hero Appreciation Month for this year. As most of you know, it runs from January 1st to March 31st, and it's usually filled with events. Every month we honor a different group of first responders, January being firefighters, February being law enforcement, and of course March is armed forces. And we also have family-friendly events. January was the snowman building contest, and this year, oh my God, we had snow. It's a miracle. I know, it's a miracle. February was the whole month of square dancing, and we did have square dancing. And March, just last Saturday, was the bathtub race, which was cold and wet. Anyway, so this is a rare Heroes Month because we're having the Armed Forces celebration on the final day of Hero Appreciation Month for the year. And it's put on every year by the Chamber of Commerce, of which I'm lucky enough to be the president, currently, until they come to their senses. So without dragging this all out, let me introduce Leah to say a few words and introduce our first speaker.
Well, good evening, and thanks for coming. And we're going to start off tonight with our honoree, which I think everybody knows, Maureen Mo Basham. Take it away, Mo.
So also, for those who do Facebook, I'm Wild Irish. A lot of people go, oh, now we know. So,
We get the wild part.
So, yeah, a little more wild since I've had that Chardonnay, but still. So just real quick, I spent 20 years and 22 days on active duty in the Marine Corps. I went in as a candidate, which, in case you don't know, is a lesser form of life than a recruit. Because you're trying to be an officer and boy, they don't treat you well. And while serving on active duty, I happened to meet this fine gentleman right here, my husband Bob. There we are right there, serving as Captain and Captain Bashams. Well, we were in 29 Palms, California, Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. We were getting ready for a parade with swords and whatnot. And as Bob points out, I never can keep my mouth shut. I'm talking even in the boat. So anyways, I found that amongst things. I thought, I'm just going to bring that.
That's cute.
So, yeah, there you go. So anyway, I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to, a part that I was going to use, leave to Leanne, I'm going to bring up to the beginning because it's kind of on a low note and I don't want to end on a low note. So what I want to tell you is that one of the hardest things I ever had to do while I was on active duty was serving as a casualty assistance officer. Even now, you know, it brings tears. No matter how hard you think it is, it's terribly harder. Having to put on that uniform, walking up to a door and ringing the doorbell, and then telling a loved one that their next of kin won't be home. So I had to do that on more than one occasion. But the Marine Corps, I will tell you, does it well. Their motto is, when one falls, another brings them home. So we always have an escort assigned to take a Marine from the time that they, you know, come into our control through the whole process and take them home and stay with their family. One of the major things that I'd like to point out is for those who die in active duty overseas, when they bring them back, you've seen the drape coffins, act over. The process that the military goes through, and this is all the services, not just the Marine Corps, is extraordinary. It's full of compassion and caring, love and kindness, what they do with the service members to prepare them to go home. And I just wanted to point out that if you're ever interested in seeing what the process is, this movie called Take a Chance, starring Kevin Bacon, is an excellent, excellent examination of the process. They go through it in much detail. It of course is one that you're going to need Kleenex with, but it really will show you the level of care and respect that goes into taking care of our fallen heroes. So now that's a little bit, then we'll get to the good part. So anyway, what I thought was, I'm not going to talk so much about me, although I will talk a little bit about me. But I wanted to talk just a little bit about the history of women in the service and women in the Marine Corps. But I've got the Cliff Note versions for you because I didn't want to keep you here too long. So anyway, so let's get started here. So perhaps the ultimate recognition of the contribution of Americans' women to any war effort was paid by Albert Speer. He was Hitler's weapons production chief when he stated the following at the conclusion of World War II to the members of the U.S. Armed Forces. And he said, "How wise you were to bring your women into your military and into your labor force. Had we done that initially, as you did, it could well have affected the whole course of the war. We would have found out, as you did, that women were equally effective and for some skills superior to males." Now, I don't mean to put you down, but just certain things that we could do better, okay? So, at the end of World War II, of the 12 million people that had served in the United States Armed Forces, nearly 280,000 were women. Altogether, 350,000 women had served in the military during World War II. They were all volunteers, and apart from nurses, had served in programs literally started from scratch 3 years earlier. Despite their problems and frustrations, most of the women who served during World War II felt satisfied that they had meaningfully contributed to winning the war, having gained a self-confidence and maturity beyond their expectations, and most would look back on the experience as one of the high points of their lives. The single most important event affecting the advancement of women in the armed forces was the end of the draft. In truth, the real reason the services kept the lid on the women's programs was that they were perfectly comfortable with the peacetime draft of men, which provided the motivation for the men to serve, and which they had every reason to believe would go on indefinitely, and it very nearly did. So short of an all-out emergency on the scale of like World War II, the service chiefs saw no real reason to increase women in the services except as nurses. In the absence of any compelling reason to do so, the services were happy to keep the women's role small, feeling no compulsion to achieve the 2% goal that had already been established in law by then. And this is, of course, 1948 and the Armed Forces Act. So, the Marine Corps had always contended that it had a lower capacity than other services to absorb women because of its relatively high ratio of combat to support troops. Even when Bob and I were in, that was the argument that they made when you would hear calls for women to be able to serve in artillery and in the infantry and in combat engineers and things of that nature. However, it was the Corps in 1964 that established a formal working group to study the women Marine programs. After receiving the group's report, General Green decided to expand the strength of women in the Marine Corps by 70%. Wow, 70%. So really, what that meant was they would bring the tiny force that currently existed up to a whopping 1% of the total force. Okay? Which was approximately 2,700 women out of about 200,000 at the time, give or take. But it did include increased job and assignment opportunities and important policy changes that improved enlistment and retention. Women were assigned to and got training in a broader range of occupational fields, and an impressive list of new duty stations for women Marines like Okinawa. Yeah, you know, mainland Japan, that wasn't too bad. So anyway, so by the end of the Vietnam era, the enlisted women's strength was up to just a little over 2,000, and there were a whopping 190 women Marine officers, so right around 1973 or so. In April 1973, a goal was set of 3,100 women in the Marines by 30 June 1977. This represented a 30% increase of women's strength and completely disregarded the traditional figure of that 1% of total Marine Corps enlisted strength. In the summer of 1976, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, responding to requests from commanders for additional women, implemented changes in October 1976, and so that over a 6-year period of time, the Marines expected to have 10,000 women in its ranks by 1985, and it did, because the end of the draft came. You know, the motto, free a man to fight, really meant something at this point. Bring women in to do supply and food service and administration and logistics so that the men could be infantry officers, drive the tanks, shoot the artillery and things of that nature. So you weren't having to use them, you know, as your office staff and things like that. So, you know, the men finally came on board and realized, hey, you know, we do need women and they can serve a role. So a breakthrough came in 1975, when General Wilson approved the assignment of women to all occupational fields in the Marine Corps, except for the 4 considered combat-related, which were infantry, riflemen, artillery, armor, which are your tanks and Amtraks, and flight crews. Although we were leaps and bounds behind the Air Force and the Navy, who let their women jump in planes about 15 years before our women ever did. Our first, female pilots in the Marine Corps were 1995. Wow. Not too long ago. In 1975, congressional mandate decreed that the service academies would admit women in the fall of 1975. So it hasn't been that long, certainly within all of our lifetimes, thus wiping out any justifications for the services to continue any separate commissioning programs for women. In no service did a coeducational officer training program seem more unlikely than in the Marine Corps. Women Marine officers were trained separately from their male counterparts. The women attended a 12-week course that geared them to prepare for the limited duties prescribed as a female officer. And I kid you not, they taught you how to sit and cross your feet at your ankles and how to hold your tea and along with a few other things, but it was really etiquette and protocol that they were teaching you.
What is the etiquette to the men?
No, not at all.
I told you the story.
The men attended a longer, more demanding 26-week course, so more than twice as long, designed to educate all young male officers in the standards of professional knowledge, esprit de corps, and leadership traditional to the Marine Corps, with a special emphasis on the duties and responsibilities of the infantry platoon commander, the rifleman. However, as it turned out, only 12% of male officers were ever assigned to the infantry, leaving 82% assigned to all the other occupational fields. And for those of you who don't know it, in the Marine Corps today, no matter what your duty assignment was, like I was air traffic control and Bob was an air control officer, everybody else's secondary job is a rifleman, no matter who you are or what you are, which is why both officers and enlisted men and women have to qualify on their service weapons every year. So anyway, after much study and debate, in January 1977, 22 female attendants entered the new 21-week male-female officer training program as members of Charlie Company. Now I say Charlie Company because at the same time that they went in, there was this show on TV with these 3 ladies. Charlie's Angels. What do you think these 22 women ended up being dubbed, right? Charlie's Angels, right. So they were kept in their own platoon, but they would attach a few women to the male platoons when they would go out on training exercises. So anyways, so that's about where I come in. This is like 1980 now. And I signed the dotted line in November of 1980 and reported to Officer Candidate School as a candidate in February of 1981. We started with 35 women, and on commissioning day in April, we were standing 12 tall. Whoa. And you had to go through and walk up and the general happened to be Al Gray, who later became the Commandant of the Marine Corps, was our commissioning officer. All the men got to go first, and there were like 100 of them. And the women got to go last. And I was the last of the women because I was Robertson, and I was the last there, so I was the very last one to go up. I'll just tell you this quick story. The night before, they let us out, kind of, those who have parents and family going to come for the ceremony, who were allowed to go out on a little liberty, go get them and have dinner and whatnot. So my father and my grandmother were there, and I had them at the hotel, and we went to the Chinese restaurant associated with the hotel, and we're sitting there and talking and yapping about it. Oh, this, and oh, you should, oh, this was crazy, and then we had to do this, all about everything that had just happened in my 10-week course. I never paid any attention to anybody who was in there. I was just talking to my family. So the next day I get up, I'm going up. I'm the last one up there. I go up there, General Ray, and he's like the Pillsbury Doughboy. He's right here, he's my height. He shakes my hand, and he's just shaking it, and he's like, and he's telling me all these things, talking about all these things that I had talked about last night. And he's, and then, obviously it's been a while, and my platoon commander, or captain over there, and my platoon veterinary sergeant over there are giving me the eye, and I'm like, don't look down, I don't know what's going on. And he looks over my shoulder and goes, don't worry, folks, we're old friends. And I'm like, and he's like, you don't remember me? And I'm like, oh, sir, I'm sure I would remember you if we had met. He said, I was in the restaurant last night. And I'm like, quickly thinking back, what the hell did I say? And luckily, it was all upbeat and whatnot. He said, it just made my heart proud and gave me a big smile to hear you talk about your training with your family. So I was like, oh, shoot. Got through that one. So anyway, we ended up with only 12 women, and that was not uncommon. Then the attrition rate back then, even for men, was 50% out of officer candidate school. And the weirdest thing about it, especially for women, when you only have 35, you're all in one room, you're all together, you know what's going on. People were leaving that first week. They had the what moment going, I have made a big mistake. Or this is not what I wanted to do, this is not where I want to be. And when something happens and they're going to leave, or whatever, what happens is you get up in the morning and everything's normal, they go to breakfast, you go do your training and whatnot, you come back, there is no sign that they ever existed in your life. And when you've only been in training for like 2 weeks, 3,000 miles away from home, you're like, what the hell just happened? Where did they take this person? Where's this person now? And this happened for 5 weeks. By the 5th week of 10 weeks, we were down to our 12 ladies. So, so we became a pretty tight-knit group after that. But I can tell you, by the time I hit the 5th week, I knew I was going to make it. There wasn't anything that they could do to me that I knew that I couldn't get through, which is a pretty good feeling to have. And so did the rest of the ladies by the time we got there. So, anyway, moving on. Okay, so after you are commissioned a second lieutenant, they send you to the basic school. And that's a school to teach second lieutenants how to be second lieutenants. But it doesn't really. But it gives you kind of a general feeling of what you may experience when you get out into your commands and things of that nature. And it's also where you are assigned what they call your military occupation specialty, MOS. They're called different things in the services. And I actually got my first pick, which was air traffic control. So, so I was able to train as an air traffic control officer at the time in Memphis, Tennessee. Oh boy, I had a fun time. Let me tell you. I mean, I worked hard, but I had a fun time. Memphis is a nice town. But anyways, while you're even then, this is now 1981. 1981, we're in the basic school. We're still in our own separate female platoon, and there are 4 male platoons. They still break you up and put 4 or 5, which eat with each male platoon for all the exercises. When you do offensive tactics, the men go out and do all the shooting, bang, bang, and all that kind of stuff, and you just walk behind and look. Because women were not allowed to be involved in offensive combat tactics, not even in training. Now, The option was that you could volunteer to go with the enlisted forces, because they had to fight against somebody, and play on the defensive role and shoot them up, bang, bang. So I'm like, I'm not sitting here walking behind these guys bored to tears. Let me, where are they? I signed me up. So I would go, and we'd be laying, you know, in ambush and whatnot. I was just like, this is so great. You know, and so, you know, make it the best of a bad situation. I will tell you now, it's fully integrated. It's not like that at all. The men and the women, both in officer candidate school and the basic school, are joined together in platoons by alphabet, you know, whatever, however it works out. And the men and women go through all the training together because all the fields have been opened now to women. So what I wanted to point out, is that I wanted to, you know, there are women currently serving 93% of the military occupational specialties in the Marine Corps. All of them are open to them, but they're just not in all of them. There are no women Marines serving in, women Marine officers serving in the infantry. Several have tried, none have passed. Okay, they did not change the standards. They maintained the standards, but allowed women in if they so chose to do that. There are, however, over 200 enlisted women in the infantry, and they're serving as riflemen and machine gunners right now, to this day. So, but we do not have women actually serving in artillery. They're in artillery units, but at the upper levels, at the leadership level, management, and administrative level. Artillery is different in the Marine Corps than it is in the Army. The Army has what they call self-propelled units. You drive to wherever you're going to shoot, and the bullets, which are about 100 pounds each, are fed automatically, and away they go. In the Marine Corps, the truck tows the howitzer out, you unhook it, and you move it into position, and then you pick up those 100-pound shells and you put them in the chamber. That doesn't come so easy, and many women have found that they don't like to do that, and I don't blame them. But the fields are open to them, should they so desire, which is good. And like I said, the first female pilot, Susan Deal, I even still recognize her name when they announced it in 1995, first one in flight school. She became a helicopter pilot. Okay, so today there are nearly 14,000 women serving in the Marine Corps. However, when I served on active duty, there were less than 3,000 women and less than 500 women Marine officers. At the time of my retirement in February 2001, I was a lieutenant colonel. I was the senior ranking female at the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center in beloved 29 Palms, California, my favorite duty station. And our female ranks had now grown to 10,000 enlisted women, 800, at that time, and 800 of those were women Marine officers when I retired. So we went from about 400, we doubled to about 800 in the 20 years I was there. So, why did I join the Marine Corps? Well, a couple of quick, real reasons. I'm born and raised in Corcoran, California, just an hour away from here. I graduated from Cal Poly and was teaching junior high school. Oh my God, in 1980. Let me tell you, those kids were wicked. Wicked. And I was not meant to be a teacher. I was mouthy. They would get mouthy with me, and I would be just as mouthy with them. And one day, when I said something to a student, and another student said, "Oh, she got you bad," I thought, that's it. If I were a parent, I would not want me teaching my child. Kind of like a light went on. And I'm like, you know, I'd like to travel. I haven't really been anywhere, just in California and whatnot. What can I do? Well, I can go in the service. At that time, I already had, my uncle was a retired Marine at that time. He'd been a master sergeant serving during Vietnam. He was a communicator, having retired with an Amtrak battalion out in Camp Pendleton. And three of his children were all in the service, two of which were in the Marine Corps. My cousin Patty and my cousin Patrick. Both are retired Marines now. My cousin Patty retired as a master gunnery sergeant, and my cousin Patrick retired as a first sergeant, having served as a senior drill instructor at San Diego for a number of years. So I called her up. Corporal Sullivan, hey, tell me about this Marine Corps. What's it all about? I'm thinking about joining. Just kind of cavalier like that. Well, this is that, this, that. So I went and talked to all the services, and I'm just telling you, that flashy uniform got me. That was it. I talked to all of them. They told me stuff. The Marine Corps promised me nothing, absolutely nothing. And I'm just like, yeah, look at that. So my recruiting officer was captain. He was an Amtrak guy, and he said, I don't know what to tell you, Mo. I know nothing about the women's programs. He said, but here's what I can tell you. If you've got a car and you can drive, because you're going to want a car. And I'm like, okay. So I did. Thank God, because, if you had a car back there, you were a very popular person. Because very few had cars back then. So I joined. My thought was, I signed a 6-year contract, 3 years active duty, 3 years inactive duty. I spent a year, I went to training, graduated number 1 out of my class. And yeah, it was a hard class. And went to, my first duty station was New River, North Carolina, which is the air station associated with Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. The only good thing about that state was I could afford to live in a condo right on the Atlantic Ocean for less than $300 a month. And I stayed there for 1 year and volunteered to go to Okinawa. Hey, I'll go, send me. So I went to Okinawa for a year, which is where I met that person right there, and really began to enjoy my time in the Marine Corps. I got taken out of the air traffic control field and brought over to an administrative position called an adjutant. And an adjutant is basically the executive assistant to the senior ranking officer, whoever that may be, a lieutenant colonel, a colonel, or a general. At first, I was like, they're just doing this because I'm a woman. And then I thought, and then I was looking at the track record and been man, woman, man, woman, man, woman. So they've been very fair about that. So I'm like, well, that shoots that theory. And the guy I have to work for, you can ask Bob, Captain Shane. Before I got to know him, whenever I'd go over there and I'd have to take paperwork, I'd be like, here you go, sir. He was what they call a limited duty officer. So he'd been enlisted, and then a warrant officer, and then been commissioned. And let me tell you, you didn't mess with him. And if you weren't part of his group, oh my gosh, you better be careful how you tread. So whenever I had to go there, it's like, my sincerest apologies, sir, but here's paperwork I was told I had to bring up to you, kind of thing. And then they told me, okay, you're going to go be the adjutant and you're going to work for Captain Shane. I'm like, oh, no, I can't work for that man. He doesn't talk to you. I can't look him in the eye. I can't work for him. But it only took me about 2 weeks. And when you worked for him, he just kind of, you were part of his flock. And let me tell you, he didn't let anybody mess with you. He didn't let anybody touch you. And because of that, I had very, very good experience being an adjutant, to the point where I really, really liked it. There were so many different things that you could do and so many different positions and potential that you could do and have as a woman that I decided, I think maybe I want to stay in. I was what they call a reserve officer, and if you wanted to stay in, you had to apply for a regular commission. You had to apply and compete. And so I applied, and by golly, I was lucky and I was selected, which meant now the only thing that could keep me from staying in the Marine Corps was if I failed to be promoted. And so at that point, I had recently been promoted to first lieutenant. And when I finished up that tour, I came back to El Toro, again in an adjutant position, which was fine. That they take care of paperwork, all your directives, orders, all of your standard operating procedures. You're the legal officer for the unit, so you're processing people for a disciplinary action, for courts-martials, you're discharging them. There's quite a wide variety of activity associated with the position. And so not too long after that, I actually got transferred into my first permanent position as an adjutant at Camp Pendleton, and was selected and promoted to captain, and spent 4 years there working as the adjutant. Let me tell you, that was like the best tour. Captain was the best rank in the Marine Corps because you were just senior enough to be able to say, because the colonel said so, this is the way we're gonna do it, without actually being totally responsible for it. So I had a lot of authority up to a certain point. I could get a lot of stuff done. I could coordinate all the courts martials, get all the paperwork done. No, Colonel wants it this, no, this way, this way, this way. And then I take it in and say, Colonel, just sign here. It's kind of like radar. And Colonel, just sign here, sign here, sign here, initial date, thank you. And just take the paperwork out. So, you know, it worked out really well. I transferred to Quantico when I was selected for major, and one of the duties I had back there was as the magistrate officer for the brig. And as the magistrate officer for the brig, what your responsibility is to conduct hearings for service members, and our brig was an all-service brig. For all services and for females on the East Coast. Miramar is the comparable on the West Coast. So anytime a command puts a service member in what they call pre-trial confinement, and you probably, if you ever watch NCIS, you'll hear that term, pre-trial confinement. They have to have a hearing within 7 days to make sure that the pre-trial confinement is just. I will tell you that 90% of the time, I release the service member back to house arrest or to their command. Most of the time, units would do this to kind of just put a little scare in the service members, you know, and most of the service members that I actually saw, believe it or not, were Marines who were brought back from UA, AWOL. When they would go to boot camp, after boot camp, they got 10-day boot camp leave, and they would go home, and something would happen. Something would happen with mom, something would happen with dad, the girlfriend gets pregnant, they don't know what to do, and they just don't go back. What happens is, the services put out a warrant for your arrest. It's a DD 565. And it stays in the system. It never goes away until you turn yourself in, It just stays there. It doesn't ever go away. And so what happens is, you're driving down the street 10 years later, and your tail light is out. And you get pulled over by the local police, and they run your driver's license. What's the first thing that comes up? Wanted by the Armed Forces of the United States of America for desertion. Boom! They don't even say, how you doing? They just say, turn around, put your hands behind your back. They take them to a processing station where they shave off all their hair, any beard hair, whatnot. It's just like boot camp all over. The one person, I had one person who was actually my age, and I was 40 at the time maybe, yeah, 40, 41, and he was my age. He'd been gone 20 years. Whoa. They caught him and brought him back. Now here's what I found out. Most of these guys, and they were mostly guys, in fact, I think I only have one woman out of like 100 guys. They're scared, you know what? And they just want to get this over with and get home. And so I just look at them and go, here's the deal. We found you once. We'll find you again if you take off. And this time, we won't wait until the police find you. If you take off on us now, we're just going to come for you. We know where you are. So you have a choice. I can either keep you in here because I can't trust you, or I'll put you in that barracks on house arrest where you'll have access to a phone so you can call your family, and in 60 days you'll be home. What's it going to be? And they say, I'll stay here. I won't do anything. I'll be good. And by God, they all were. I didn't lose a one. Not a one. Because they just wanted home. And, you know, they would process them expeditiously. You know, we knew, you know, they didn't mean, they weren't bad. They weren't bad people. And they hadn't done bad things while they were out there. They just were young and immature and made bad decisions. So, you know, we weren't going to compound things by, yes ma'am.
So for desertion, they only got 60 days?
Well, here's the deal. Desertion, it's a term used because that's the term on the form. Anything, if you're gone more than 30 days, legally, the term is desertion. However, nobody has been charged with desertion when there has not been a time of war. Nobody has. It's just been converted to unauthorized absence. So that's why they just feel like, okay, here's the deal. What good would it do to run them through this big courts martial and put them in the brig for 5 years. I mean, what purpose is that gonna serve? And the military understands that. And they understand that these people were young, they made bad decisions, but they've been good people ever since. So we're just gonna do what we need to do, clean up the record, and get them back home. And that works out. I had I did keep in about 10% of the people that came before me. I felt like the unit had just cause. Because we had, rapes, murders, things of that nature. I had 2 challenges come up to me. That's where the Marine and their attorney decide that, I've made the wrong decision. So you have to go up before an administrative judge, and I won both cases. So I really picked and choose my battles on who I was going to play absolutely fair, who I was going to keep in, and who I was going to let go of. But it's a very kind of a wide opening experience, and talking to these, and they're not kids anymore. Now they're 30, 35, and 40, and you're talking to them like, what happened, what were you thinking, and there you go. So one of the other things that I did while on active duty was having to coordinate change of commands, retirements, distinguished guest visits, DACOITS, Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Service, committee meetings and things of that nature. And we're talking hundreds of people, 200, 300, 400 of people. And because you're the adjutant, that's protocol and things like that typically fall to you to set up. You're going to have a change of command, new colonel's coming in, the old colonel's going out. Somebody's going to retire after 30 years, you're in charge of all of that. So for those people who know me, and I'm working on doing like the holiday bazaar and things like that, they're like, how did you get so organized and learn how to do all this kind of stuff? Well, thank you, United States Forces. Making me have to,
You're agreeing.
put these change of commands on and take care of these committees coming from all over the place and coming to our duty stations and, things of that nature. So anyway, just a couple of things here that were just kind of fun. I think the proudest thing I am of my service on active duty probably are these 2 things right here. And those who've served on active duty know exactly what these are. These are shooting badges. In the Marine Corps, you have marksmen, which are a little square with like the target on there, affectionately known as toilet seats, sharpshooter, and expert. And I finished up my service as an expert rifle and pistol shot multiple times over.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah. So you wear those on your uniform, and the men, or maybe they're or maybe they got their toilet seats or something like that. You're there, and we'll just tap off so I can tell the story. We're captains at 29 Palms, and we ended up out on the pistol range together. I was on the rifle range, and I would do that and then come in and do the pistol range. And so he's on one side of the shooting range, I'm on the other side, and somehow the coaches found out that we were married. And so on the day of qualification, they're running back and forth, checking my scores, checking his score, and they're finally going back to him, going, sir, if you don't do something, she's just going to beat the holy hell out of you. And he's like, you are not helping the situation. So there. Now if you want to tell me, now you can tell your story about that.
The gun malfunction, it was not my fault.
There we go. And then there's a couple of memorable people that I was associated with that I think this crowd might know, and I'll finish this up here, but I had the opportunity to work with then First Lady, Miss Hillary Clinton, when I was a major in Quantico. She, after not being able to work something out with healthcare, remember she really pushed hard there when her husband was first elected president. The next big project she took on was child care. Many of you may have heard that. So one of the things she looked at then was military child care, because we were well established at that point with our child care services. And Quantico, where we were stationed at, was about 30 miles south of DC, but Quantico had the largest and most diverse child care program of any of the bases around there, because most of them were smaller bases, and senior bases, leadership bases, and Quantico was a big base. And we had childcare from 6 weeks to 12 years old in child care facilities, before and after school facilities, and in homes of providers that lived on the base. And so Mrs. Clinton wanted to know, Mrs. Clinton wanted to know all about child care. And so, I worked with her and her staff for quite a while on that. And one funny note, this kind of stuff. And after she's talking, she goes, well, does anybody have a question? And all the kids had their names, and Sam goes right up, and I go, oh my God. Hopefully he won't say his last name is Basham. And she goes, well, yes, Samuel, what would you like to know? And he goes, just like this, what's going on here? What's all these people? They're taking pictures of these slides, and what are these things out here? And I just don't understand, what is all this? She's like, well, Samuel, that's a very good question. And she set out to explain to him, you know, the things that were going on. So anyway, so that was kind of an interesting little, you know, meeting. I didn't actually ever get to meet Paul Newman, but I have over here, you saw it. Where is he? Let's see, where is he at? He's in here somewhere. There he is. But I worked with his brother and sister-in-law. And so here's the original picture right here. Such a good looking. And his brother was really tall, like well over 6 feet tall, way taller than him. And we'll just call it aerodynamic, as a few of you are in the audience that I see too. But he looked just like Paul Newman in the face with those blue eyes. So you definitely knew he was a Newman. And I worked with them on the Coachella Valley Blood Bank Board of Directors. And when I retired, they had gotten Paul to sign a picture for me and gave that to him. I was just wonderful, wonderful. And then some of you are going to know these bottom two. I got little pictures. This is Rory Calhoun, was a movie actor in like the 40s, 50s, 60s, and Gene Autry, the singing cowboy. I met them both during tours in 29 Palms, a popular place because a lot of folks live in the greater Palm Springs area. They retire out there. So Rory Calhoun, here's the story. Bob's friend made me do it. He's a retired Marine. He's working as the postmaster in a little town called Morongo Valley, which is near 29 Palms. And he comes to Bob and I and he goes, you know, I know this family, they've got their daughter and she doesn't really know anybody out here and she's like this old and just wondering, Mo, you know, you're the XO, the Italian, you know, don't you have somebody you can kind of hook up with? And I'm just going, oh, please don't make me do this, Skip. He's like, come on, just do it. So I'm like, who is it? He's like, well, the daughter's name is Rory. And I'm like, well, my parents, Rory Calhoun. And I go, Rory Calhoun? I mean, like, Rory Calhoun, Robert Mitchum, Marilyn Monroe down the river on the raft. He's going, yeah, I think he was. I'm like, what? Okay, so but the daughter's Rory Calhoun. So I go to my poor Lieutenant Steve Nagy. He's the S4 officer, just first lieutenant. I go, Steve. I'm sorry. But I have to make you go out with this girl. I was the XO of our battalion. He was one of my staff. And I said, here's the deal. La. She's going to come. Just take the whole day. Just take the whole day. You know, don't have to take his leave. Just go. Take her, show her, whatever. They're married now. 2 children, Lynn and Andrew. Thank God. I'm 100. It's the only time I ever put them up. That's great. No. And the last one, Gene Autry. He came out to several of the parties that we would throw out there. He was just a distinguished guest of the commanding generals whenever we would get together, and oftentimes he would come out there and serenade us a little bit and whatnot, so I had the opportunity to meet him. And I just want to do one last thing, because it's important to me, and that is one of the things, and you read the letter from Colonel Mitchell Page, Medal of Honor winner. Who lived in the greater Palm Springs area. We dedicated a building in 29 Palms to him. It was part of the, in 29 Palms, they're the only base that does live fire and maneuver training exercise. We shoot real bullets, we shoot real artillery, and the planes drop real bombs. And because of that, we have a very extensive and intricate war fighting training command. And the new building that, at the time, this was the late 90s, they were building for this command was going to be named Page Hall after Colonel Page. So, so we were going to have a big ceremony and all this kind of stuff. So he invited some of his fellow Medal of Honor winners to join him, and we had a big hoodoo out at the base and all that, put on a big show and all that kind of stuff for them. And he wrote me a nice letter of thank you and all that kind of stuff. And there were 4 of them that came that day that I got to meet. Three are deceased now, 1 is still alive. We had Colonel Page, who was awarded the Medal of Honor for actions in the Battle of Guadalcanal in 1942. He was a young lieutenant. He passed away in 2003 at the age of 83. We had Woody Williams, who received the Medal of Honor for his actions at the Battle of Iwo Jima. And he is currently the only living Medal of Honor winner from that battle, still alive. He's 93. We also had Jack Lucas, who to this day is still the youngest Medal of Honor recipient. He lied and joined the Marine Corps when he was 14. The Medal of Honor was awarded to him by President Truman when he was 17 for his actions during the Battle of Iwo Jima as well. In 2008, he passed away at the age of 80. And the last one was Doug Jacobson. He was also a recipient of the Medal of Honor for his actions on Iwo Jima. He passed away in 2000 at the age of 79. But these fine young gentlemen, you know, and I called them all fine young gentlemen and all that, were kind enough to, these are the 3-cent Iwo Jima stamps.
Oh.
And signed
Wow.
personal signatures on these stamps for me that I have and that I keep. So, you know, that was, you know, quite the way to kind of finish up my career, because it was about 6 months later that I retired and came to this wonderful haven. I know I dragged on a little too much, I always do.
No way.
With stories and stuff. If there's any questions, I'll answer them quickly, but I know we still have, oh, excuse me, okay, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I've been holding this question since you started.
Okay.
When was the first time you actually had to dress down a male Marine, and what was it like?
Boy, you know what? No, but he dressed me down one time. Anybody who wants to listen to after this is welcome to, because he loves to tell the story, and it's only fair because I told a story on him. So, you know, it was early on, and it was really more, I'm going to say, a lack of understanding. You know, at that time, women were still very new in commands. You know, many commands still did not have women in them, and there were large portions of bases where women didn't exist. So the protocol and etiquette that a Marine would give to an officer obviously is the same for men and women. Some of them didn't understand that. Some of them didn't want to understand that. And I had to be careful to determine which it was. Do we have a lack of understanding and learning, or do we have, you know, an issue with women? And we did. I had a lieutenant colonel that I worked for, but the women officers, and there were 2 of us, we were both captains at the time, he would not report on us, although he should have, writing our evaluations and things like that. He did all the men, but the XO, the number 2 guy, wrote on us, because he was just one of those that, you know, and this is, I'm pregnant with Angela? Somewhere around 1990, so we're not talking that long ago. 1988, 1990, still was not comfortable with women in the Marine Corps. As it turned out, the XO was obviously better for us. He wrote us good reports. We would have had terrible reports from him and fared terribly against our male counterparts, but that mentality didn't die off easy. And one of the things I try to explain when I talk about being a female in a position of leadership is, there really is an element of female leadership that I use, and I was talking to Leah and Peter a little bit about this, and it's part Marine, and in some cases it can be part mom, because you're dealing with, in a lot of cases, young men, young women, 17, 18, just out of high school, this is the only place they've been, and they don't know anything from anything. And my goal was not to tear them down, they've already been torn down and built back up. My goal was to build my team and to do as many things that I could to bring us together, make us cohesive, everybody get to know everybody have time to learn, but also the fact that as I held them responsible, they would do the same for me. If I wasn't willing to do something, I wasn't going to make them do it either, and likewise. And so I think that was the most important thing. Once I really, by the time I was about a captain, you start really getting into a position where you're a leader and you can make or break yourself, let me tell you. And I looked out as a young second lieutenant, having some really good staff NCOs and NCOs who could have fed me to the wolves with, and spun me the wrong way, but really helped me understand the need to develop that team. And the team doesn't just consist of that Marine. That team is that Marine and who's ever behind him, wife, children, whatever the case may be, because if there's something wrong with that family, then the Marine can't function at 100%. So you have to learn, to take care of the whole family. And the Marine Corps had a hard time understanding that for a lot of years. They didn't have the family programs, they didn't have the nice housing, they didn't have the nice commissaries and exchanges. You had to go to the Air Force for that. But they finally learned, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And seriously. And now you see a big difference. And it really helps with the retention rates that you have with service members, or even for those who are thinking about going in based upon, the facilities you're going to live in and the benefits that you're going to get, and likewise. But I'm happy to say I didn't have to dress down too many Marines, and glad of it. And like I said, most of it was more not knowing, lack of knowledge, than just outright stubbornness, on their part. Yes?
When they opened up the MOS to all genders, did they also equalize the pay for all genders as well?
Yeah, so the pay has always been equal, believe it or not. In the military, it just is. If you're an E2, you get E2 pay. I don't care what you're doing, and I don't care if you're a male or female, or I don't care where you are. Except, the only difference is if you get hazard pay, if you go into a hazardous area, but it doesn't matter, male, female, you'll get hazard pay. So, but other than that, whatever your rank is, male, female, you get that pay. And if you get married and you have kids, the pay is the same for women as it is for men. That it wasn't always the case. Up through the 60s, in fact, Bob's mom and dad were both in the Air Force. When she got married to his father, she had to get out of the Air Force. You could not be married, which meant obviously certainly you could not have kids. Then you could be married, but you couldn't have kids. Then you could be married and you could have stepchildren. But you didn't get the family allowance. You could be married and have your stepchildren and all that, but no family allowance. That only went to men. The full equality didn't come until 1973. And in 1973, women could be married, and they could have children, and they could stay on active duty, and they could have the same family allowance as the men did. 1973, I was in high school then. I went in there. There you go.
My question is, when you and Bob got together, was it okay because you were both captains?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So that's what she's talking about is fraternization.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I just thought of something. So some of you are going to remember way back, what has it been, probably 15 years ago, the fraternization case in the Air Force with the first lieutenant female.
Yes.
And so that was big. It was all over the news. Well, shortly after that, the Marine Corps had a fraternization case too, but you didn't hear anything about it. Because the Marine Corps doesn't air their dirty laundry. They don't. Well, I got that case. I I was selected to be the hearing officer, which is like a grand jury. They have to come before and you have to determine whether or not there's enough evidence to go to court. On that case, it was a first lieutenant, female, and, a Navy corpsman. I'd say that because she was in the Navy, and a Navy corpsman. And I found that there was sufficient evidence to go forward. But they did it all within, the confines of the Marine Corps, no publicity, no nothing, and,
Why is that? I mean, if two people want to be together and.
it has everything to do with maintaining leadership and the respect of your Marines or the people that are working for you. And if, let's say, so I'm a captain, and I decide I like Corporal Smith over here, who's my Marine, but I have 12 other Marines over here too, but I really like Corporal Smith. So no matter how much I try to treat everybody equally, somebody's going to feel like it's not happening. And it may be true. I may not be. And so as a result, the Marine Corps has always been probably the strictest, I would think, on fragmentation. We never addressed each other by first names. You'll hear that a lot in some of the services. It was always by rank or by last name. But it was usually, by, Private Davis, or something of that nature. But that's what it is. It's the breakdown of your leadership and your authority when your troops don't have the confidence in you, or they think, because of appearance, that there's something going on and you're not being treated fairly. There's some fine lines on where they draw, where it's okay and where it's not okay based upon rank. If I were a first lieutenant and Bob was a major, even though we weren't in the same command or something like that, at one point that could have been a problem because of the field grade, major and above being considered the upper level of leadership, captain and below, lower level. But lieutenants and captains, fine, majors and lieutenant colonels, fine. It's a little bit easier now, but it still exists and it still is an issue, and it's still something that we're concerned with.
Do they kind of talk to you about that kind of?
Oh, yeah. It's constantly reinforced, constantly. So as a result, we don't have too many problems because, nobody can say, I didn't know. Nobody told me, because Yes, sir.
Okay, it's me again, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Are you in touch with any of the current women in the Marine Corps? And if so, are you able to draw a comparison between what you experienced and how they are acting today, what it's like for them?
Not so much, but my brother, my baby brother, he's 13 years younger than I, went into the Marine Corps. So I have an uncle and 2 cousins and my brother that are all retired Marines. Master Sergeant, First Sergeant, Master Gunnery Sergeant, and Major. And because he went in the mid-90s, when I was a Major and a Lieutenant Colonel, I did get to see and experience some of what the women were experiencing through him at that time, because at that point the training had changed, the men and women were together, all but some of the combat related MOSs were open, the flight community had already opened to women, and it's amazing. It's almost, they have no idea that we have paved this road for them, none whatsoever, because for them it just always has been this way. And in a way, that's good. I mean, we want them to think that they're going to come into this equal situation and have an equal chance of making it or not, being successful or not, based upon their own abilities and skills and knowledge. We don't want them, like us, always thinking we have to be 10 times better because we're up against men, and we're already at a disadvantage because there's so many, we already have so many strikes against us in a service, Now, so so the women now, don't see the stereotypes and don't see the walls that were put up that we did, you know, they obviously it's still tough. Let me tell you, it's not any easier getting through boot camp. It's not any easier getting through training. Just as many fail today as they have before. But it is a different environment. It is an environment of equality as much as you can get. And I'm here to tell you, the military is where our society establishes the acceptance of an issue. Blacks in the service, women in the service, gays and lesbians in the service. And whatever the next social issue is going to be, the military is where you're probably going to see it play out. It's just the way it always has been. The military has to make it work. They just have to. They can't play around, you know, with an issue. Once the military's decided this is the way it's going to be, then that's the way it's going to be. And then you see it usually follow closely thereafter in society as the accepted norm. So, yeah, the Marine Corps is like the big social experiment. No, the military, it really is the big social experiment. You just see it, that's just the way it is. And if it can work in the military, it can work anywhere else. You know, it just can't. You know, if people say it can't, it's just because they don't want to. You know, there's always a way to make it work.
Thank you.
Wait, there's one question here.
I was just going to say, where is Marine OCS? Quantico?
Yeah, Marine Corps OCS is at Quantico. Enlisted training is in San Diego, which they call the Hollywood Marines still, and Parris Island. And Parris Island is where they enlisted with them, and they're trained there.
Mo, I've got a certificate
Oh,
for
thank
you.
you.
Let's see, county supervisor, our new guy, Connor Crocker. Is a colonel of the U.S. Marine Corps. The chamber has one here, and that's a new certificate from.
Hey, I know this place, it's really good.
Anytime you want to get away, or if you have guests,
Yeah,
the house is
friends,
overfull.
Bob and I will be over here. I've seen some of those
Send them
videos
to us.
that you make. Wonderful, thank you very much.
And every year, a local artist or artisan makes
How
some kind
nice.
of piece of art.
That's nice, huh?
This is a heavy one, I tell you. And sometimes they say who it is, and sometimes they want to be anonymous. This year, you've got an anonymous one.
Okay.
So you can see how they put the logo in there, burned it in.
It's very nice, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. Thank you half of this stuff. Bob and I are dressed whites. These don't exist anymore, they're gone.
How come?
You can pass these around if you like.
Yeah,
Mo.
yeah, I've got all sorts of pictures.
Mo, are there still separate uniforms for men and women in the Marines?
Well, yes and no, because you don't want to put a man in a skirt, not even a picture. But as far as the camouflage utilities, the men and women wear the same thing. The dress uniforms are as alike as they can be, but obviously the women's are cut for women, and we also have skirts still with ours and heels. And let me tell you, I was in a command where I was in like 3-inch heels. I can run just as fast as any man in boots in those 3-inch heels. When I was in and I got promoted to major, you have to buy a dress uniform. You know, it's like black tie. And there were so few of us that they made them to order. So, and they were like $1,000 made because they made them to order. Now you go, they're on the racks everywhere. I'm like, God, I could have just gone and that's my size and whatnot. But you had to give them 6 months. They measured you everything because everything was different. The jacket, the skirt, the cummerbund, the cover, everything. Yeah. So, so the uniforms are pretty much the same now. You know, except for the few things that have to be.
I don't know, some men might want a skirt.
No, I don't think so. No. But the uniforms all have pants with them that the women can wear.
Oh, okay.
Depending on, for example, parades. If you're in a parade and going to have to march, you don't wear skirts. You're always in slacks. If you're on recruiter duty, a lot of time you're in slacks, not in a skirt. So, yeah. So they're pretty much the
Did you
same.
say they dropped dress whites?
Yeah, the white uniforms that you saw there,
How about the Navy? Did they drop them too? I wonder.
I don't know if they did, I've been out.
No, the Navy still has dress
No,
white.
they still
Do they?
dress white.
So the big dress uniform for the Marine Corps, still dress blues.
Yeah.
But we also have the greens, the dress greens, which are a step down. Okay.
Or in tropical
Yeah.
locations.
Just
Yeah, they'll
FYI,
turn-
just FYI, the movie that she was showing, Taking a Chance,
I can imagine.
great movie, it's wise, and if you have Amazon Prime, it's included.
Yeah, it's an awesome movie.
He does a marvelous job in this movie. He took a real personal, part of this and to make this movie, he was actively involved in making the movie. So. I'm sorry so much. Thank
Okay, now,
Really.
Bill Haxton was going to speak, but I think most people know that he has some health issues lately, and he was getting really weak.
He should have said something, he should have gone first.
He didn't want to interrupt. You're here to say what you need to say, and that's what he wanted to happen. But he was getting really weak, so what he's done is he's left his speech, which he wrote out, and he's left it for someone else to say. Carrie
Hardwick.
Hardwick is going to
So,
read it.
I have Bill's speech, and I asked him if he wanted this, it was important for him, for the story to be told tonight.
Could I ask a question first, because myself and some other people have to go home and take some meds. Is there any way to get this emailed if we ask for it from?
Well, what I was going to propose to the crowd here is whether you would all come back to hear Bill tell this story. Because I think this story should be told. I've heard this speech,
Yes.
and while I know it's important to him to have it told, I think it's important to have him tell it.
Yeah.
And so if you'd all agree,
Yes.
Yes.
find a time.
Leah?
Is that what everybody wants to do? I mean, we try to hold this during Heroes Months, and then it,
Well, it's already 8:30 almost, though.
yes,
Yeah.
it's late.
If-
People,
if-
How would we do that?
I don't think the museum would have a problem doing it again. Today is a Friday, we could do it next Friday?
Or another, whatever.
So what fits Bill's?
What feels.
when he's ready.
Let's pick a night that, he's feeling good and gives
Yeah,
us
next
time to get
Friday.
here.
It's a very
I-
personal
Jazz
story.
is-
and
Let's-
while
let's-
I'm trying to
Oh, it's
understand-
jazz. Oh, that's right.
That would be a bad time, yeah.
That would be nicer.
Yeah.
If he can't come back, you could.
Then I guess I'll put on a
We don't
wig.
wait.
I will channel Bill.
Yeah.
I would encourage you all to come back. This is a very interesting and moving story that is.
We will have the videotape, so we'll make it available to everyone.
Yes, we were gonna videotape this, so.
Well, I'm sorry, I used the word tape. There's no tape involved.
Digital.
Yeah, that's right.
Digital.
That's right. Okay, well, so you don't want to read it tonight? We're just gonna
I'm
wait
hap-
for
I'm
Bill?
happy to- I think you should hear from Bill, but
Yeah.
I want to honor his wish to have it told too, so I'm a little torn.
So if you want to reschedule,
I-
that would be nice.
I think the reschedule is.
Why don't we try and reschedule?
Option.
We won't conflict with Jazz Affair, which is next week.
We'll have to find a date that doesn't.
Yeah,
conflict.
and we'll post it on Facebook. Is that okay with everyone?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Okay,
I know that the rodeos come.
We'll get this in.
But there's usually a weekend.
Yeah, but we have a week in between.
There is a weekend. in
That's
between.
Easter, so just
we'll find a
FYI,
date.
but there's plenty of dates in the
Yes.
year.
Thank you
So-
very much.
Thank you.
Best piece of ever gave.
And everybody, there's more refreshments, help yourself.
Come on.